always consider myself one of the luckiest people in the world in that I get to live my passion on a daily basis. There's really nothing more rewarding, fulfilling, and exciting than working with recovering addicts, meaning people who are wanting to bring about change in their lives. The biggest frustration in what I do is that there is so much misunderstanding about what addiction is and what recovery is. Firstly, from recovering addicts themselves, and dare I say even in the professional field. And I understand somebody who hasn't walked the journey, it's very difficult for them to understand why the addicts do what they do. And that's sort of part of my mission, is to try and explain some of the workings, how it works, and then ultimately what we need to do to bring about change. The two main premises that I work from is, number one, that the problem in addiction is not the drug. I just want to let that sink in for a second or two. The problem in addiction is not the drug. If the drug was the problem and the addict stopped using, everything would change, and it doesn't work like that. The drug is just symptomatic of a lot of the underlying reasons, like the need that the person is trying to meet or the experience that they're looking for. So addiction starts off as a needs-based behavior, and some of those needs may determine for me to start experimenting and exploring with certain behaviors or substances. Interestingly, they estimate only about 20% of people who experiment with drugs and alcohol become addicted. 80% don't. That means there must be some kind of predisposition. Personally, I don't really buy into the whole idea that I am born to be an addict kind of thing. Yes, there may be some genetic predispositions, but for me it's more the level of the need being met when I experiment. I often hear people saying, I tried cocaine, I tried cat, it didn't do it for me. Meaning it did not meet a need for me. It didn't provide me with any exceptional feeling. In addiction, to the contrary, find it gave us something. It provided us with a feeling, it helped us to numb pain, it helped us to have an exciting experience, it helped us to escape trauma, whatever it may be. So I really believe it's the level of the need being met at the time of the experimenting or the exploring that contributes to the fact that we keep going back, and over time it moves from a needs-based behavior. I want to use because I enjoy it, and for a relatively small percentage it moves on to I need to use in order to function. And that's what people say, I have to have a couple of drinks to calm down, or I need to use a stimulant in order to concentrate. That's danger sign already. So I need to use in order to function. And then for the relatively small group of addicts as such, it gets to a stage where I have to use in order to survive. There's an unconscious feeling that if I don't use, I'm going to die. There's no way I can survive. And what happens by the time it gets to that stage, I often hear people saying, but it's choice. Why doesn't the addict choose not to use? If the addict can choose to no longer use, it means they're not an addict. It means they haven't progressed to the stage where they've lost control, where they've literally lost the ability to be able to choose whether they use or not. And the reason for that is by that time the drug has caused damage to the pleasure and reward centers of the brain. The addict can no longer enjoy simple pleasures that normal people can do. The only thing they can enjoy is the intense rush or whatever it is, the feeling the drug provides. Because the part of the brain that processes pleasures and reward has been impaired, it needs to be stimulated intensely. Just the fear of not being able to enjoy myself, not being able to enjoy pleasures is quite a scary thought, because there's boredom, there's monotony, so that's part of the disease. Then the part of the brain that processes the decision-making process is also impaired because of this intense need so that I can feel something. It impairs the part of the brain that decides this is right, this is wrong, I should do it, I shouldn't do it. Literally starts to slow down in function. And that's where the addict actually loses the ability to choose whether to use or not. That's why addiction is called the disease of more. It's a disease based on the loss of control, and the decision making has been impaired. Now, for those of us who like big words, I like using big words because it makes me sound intelligent. There's a terminology called hypofrontality. And hypofrontality talks about the frontal cortex of the brain, where all the logic, the reasoning, the decision-making, understanding consequences to actions operate in the normal person. With my drug use, with the impairment of the parts of the brain, the pleasure and reward centers, the decision-making, that part, the logical reasoning part of the brain, is also impaired and literally starts to slow down. And the reason why that thinking part of the brain slows down, because my whole body, my nervous system has gone into survival mode because of the feeling I have to use in order to survive. There's no way I can think clearly at work unless I've used something. And it develops to the stage where there is an unconscious belief, as weird as this sounds, there's an unconscious belief that if I don't use, I'm going to die. Now, the rest of the normal people looking at the addict thinks, but surely they can understand their continued drug use is going to cause them to die. That part of the addict's brain that processes that isn't working anymore, because the whole system has gone into survival. If I can explain what I mean by that, say for example, you go out at night, out of your front door, and there's a long black snake lying on the paving. How many of you are going to use your thinking brain and stand there and think, is the snake dangerous? Should I pick it up? Should I touch it? How many of you will do that? Unless you're a snake expert. The rest of us will scream, jump, run away. Why? Because the mind has gone into survival mode. There's danger. The brain gets flooded with all sorts of stress chemicals to energize me to run away. And in the process, the thinking part of the brain slows down to stop me from thinking, because thinking might get me killed. Do you see what I'm saying? The brain is trying to protect me from taking time to figure out whether the snake is dangerous or not. It might kill me. So it gets flooded with the different kinds of stress chemicals. I jump, scream, run away as part of my survival. The same with the addict in active addiction. Every time there's a craving, and I'm talking about in active addiction and early recovery. It gets better later on. But when there's a craving, when there's a memory, when there's withdrawal, that part of the brain kicks in. The whole nervous system goes into survival mode. The thinking part of the brain shuts down, and there is no thought of consequences anymore. Rationally, they know if they use, they might lose their family, they might go to prison, might lose their job, they might die from it. But that part of the brain that processes that kind of information is not working anymore. It's pure survival. Does that explain why addicts do the most irrational, insane things when they start craving? Because at a subconscious level, it's either I get to use or I'm going to die. And all of us are more inclined towards survival when our lives are being threatened. Even non-addicts, so-called normal people, if your life is threatened, you will do things you wouldn't do under normal circumstances. You might even defend yourself to the point where you kill somebody else. You would never do that otherwise, but at that time, you are purely in survival mode. The thought is not there, even I could kill this person. And that is part of the insanity of addiction. That's why I say the problem in addiction is not the drug. Yes, the drug is a huge problem, obviously. The drug is what causes all the damage. The drug is what drives a person to the stage where the brain is so impaired there's no more logical thinking. However, simply stopping using does not meet the needs that drove me to experiment in the first place. Simply stopping using does not restore and heal the parts of the brain that has been damaged. If anything, I stop using, I've got this big hole in my life. I've got no coping mechanisms in place anymore. Because for years I was in pure survival mode where the drugs were thinking for me, they were feeling for me. I don't know how to do that on my own anymore. This is why for most addicts, it's a matter of time before they either relapse or they cross-addict to another drug or behavior if all they do is stopping using. Do you get the point when I say that the real problem in addiction is not the drug of choice? It's that whole addict personality that is developed, the whole culture that is developed, the behaviors that go with it. what we call people, places, things. That's all part of the addiction. The whole lifestyle that is developed, the values, the morals that are developed. If I had to give each of you a piece of paper and ask you to write down a list of your values, the things that are important, and the list of your morals, your sense of right and wrong, you'll all be able to write quite a few things. The addict in active addiction has got one value and one moral. That one value is to survive. I have to use in order to function or survive. That is the value. Period. The only moral is whatever it takes. I will steal, I will manipulate, I will lie, I will be dishonest in order to survive so that I can keep using. At that stage, there is no thought for the addict, it is wrong to lie. That was a parasite personality that developed over years of using, that when it is stimulated, it goes into survival mode, it will do whatever it needs to do in order to survive. One value, one moral. That doesn't change when I stop using. In my world, the person who has stopped using is not in recovery. They're sober. Sobriety is not recovery. Recovery is developing a whole new lifestyle, a whole new quality of life, a whole new set of behaviors, a whole new set of beliefs and ways of thinking. The first principle was that the main problem in addiction is not the drug of choice. The second principle, the main goal in recovery is not to be sober. Most people think recovery means being sober. No. Being sober means being sober, I'm not using. The goal in recovery is not to stop using or be sober or be clean. The goal in recovery is to develop such a quality of life, such new behaviors, such new ways in which I can find fulfillment, meet those needs that started my addiction off in the first place, that it develops to such an extent where the need to use becomes less and less and less. To me, that means in actual recovery, sobriety becomes a byproduct. I'm not focusing on I can't use anymore. That is one of the scariest things for an active addict as well as an addict in recovery for quite a long time, to think I can never use again. It's scary. But if they think I will continue developing a new quality of life so that there is less and less a need to use, is very different. I just want to say something about consequences. Consequences do not keep addicts clean. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Consequences do not keep addicts clean. If consequences kept addicts clean, no addicts would relapse. They will still do it. All that consequences do is they might get the addict to get to a place where they ask for help, or the rock bottom. Being in the streets, I had enough of it. I now ask for help. My family threatened to kick me out the house. I realize I have an option that I can ask for help, whatever the consequences may be. However, those consequences in themselves do not keep me in recovery. So if consequences don't keep me clean, what will keep me clean? My own personal motivation for recovery. I always like to explain it in scientific terms because I want to understand how things work. I'm so over people telling me to do certain things and I do it and it doesn't work for me. And I'm talking about in recovery. I want to know how it works. Why do consequences not keep addicts clean? Because consequences create stress. When I think of negative consequences, my body releases stress chemicals. I don't feel good. And for the addict to experience stress and not feel good means I want to use. Because that addict personality, although it kills me in the process, is also there to help me. That sounds insane. That addict is there to help me to feel better when I feel bad. Or that's the belief. So I use. So the more consequences I create for the addict who has now made the decision to go forward, the less chance there is of that addict staying in recovery. Now, I know I'm challenging some general philosophies about consequences. I'm yet to see an addict staying clean purely because of consequences. Yes, it gets them to ask for help. It gets them to think twice, but we want to find a way to help that addict to move forward in their recovery. Consequences create stress because the body releases stress chemicals when I think of all the bad things that happen. That might drive me, yes, to ask for help. Motivation, however, requires a completely different biochemical in the body called dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that makes me look forward to something, that makes me feel excited, that makes me enjoy things, novelty, all the type of thing. Consequences cannot cause the release of dopamine. I've got to start to think, what is in recovery for me? What is there that I can enjoy in my recovery? What is there that I can look forward to in recovery? And by thinking like that, the body then starts to release all sorts of feel-good chemicals, and that over time is what replaces the need for the drug of choice. Now, I'm not saying there is no room for consequences. The only real room for induced consequences, if I can call them that way, where the supporters start to create consequences, is for the supporters' sanity, for them to set boundaries in place, where they say to the addict, if you don't stay clean, these are going to be the consequences. But not thinking that will keep the addict clean, that's to protect me as the supporter. These are the things I will tolerate. These are the things I will not tolerate. The addict has the responsibility of finding their own motivation. And in my world, the only real motivation is always what is in it for me. If we are in recovery for somebody else, it will not work. If I'm in recovery for my wife, and somewhere along the line she starts to irritate me, or she starts to doubt me, or whatever the case may be, what's going to happen to my recovery? I'm going to start getting frustrated with her, and I will blame her. And then I hear the famous words addicts say, what's the point? They don't trust me, I might just as well start using again. The only reason why I am in recovery is for me. That's not the main reason, that's the only reason. You're doing it for yourself. What about your wife and your son? Well, think about it. If I do recovery for me, I've got the right motivation of what's in it for me, I'm going to take it seriously. And I will do what I need to do for my recovery. I will continue to get better. My wife and my son will continue to get more of the real me, because I'm not doing it for them. They benefit. The point I'm trying to make, it's pointless trying to nag the addict to go into recovery. It's pointless to even try and play the, what I call manipulation. You know, I'm your parent after everything I've done for you, and don't you understand how you're hurting me? Those are real things. I'm not minimizing that. Of course, it's devastating. To a parent, the two Ds are the greatest fears for their children: death and drugs. There is no greater fear for a parent. And to some parents, death is easier than drugs, because at least death, there's finality. Drugs is ongoing, they see the destruction that could ultimately lead to death. So I'm not minimizing or any of that. What I'm saying is that will not serve as motivation for the addict to stay clean. Continue to create whatever boundaries you need to create. Continue to create whatever consequences you need to create. Understanding it's for your own sanity, what you will allow and what you won't allow. And active addict, hopefully it will get them to a point where they're going to ask for help, because they know they can't get away with it anymore. However, that is not going to keep them clean. They need help in developing the real motivation. What I understand, what you are doing now is meeting the needs that the drugs must have met in the first place, but in a healthy way. And like I said, yes, sometimes the thoughts are still there, the craving is still there, but I'm doing something else instead. In my mind, it's almost like when the addict starts to talk to me in recovery, I can say to it, I hear you, but I don't need you. I'm doing something with my life that's worthwhile. You don't need to talk to me. That parasite personality that developed, with all the reasons why we use the drugs, the needs that it meets, the behaviors that go with it, that personality has been wired into the brain and will be there for the rest of our lives. All recovering addicts will remain at risk for the rest of their lives. However, in practicing active recovery, developing new behaviors, new lifestyle choices, the motivation of why I'm doing it, what is it look forward to, you rewiring another part of the brain with recovery. And the longer you work at your recovery, the more that recovery wiring almost becomes your default behavior. Should there be craving, should there be euphoric recall or whatever it is. They estimate it takes about 2 years for the body and the brain to heal from the damage of the drugs, and for the body and the brain to learn to produce its own chemicals again. 2 years. It's up to 5 years of continued practicing of recovery for that recovery personality to actually become wired into the brain, where that becomes my default thinking when there is craving, when I'm under pressure, when I feel emotional pain, the recovery thinking kicks in. Up until the time, we're pretty much at risk of the addict thinking kicking in when we go through tough times. Unfortunately, there is no quick fix for this. Unfortunately, there is no tablet we can take for recovery. Yes, there are some medications that can help with the craving initially, absolutely. There is no surgery even where I can remove that parasite personality that's wired into my brain. All I can do is, number one, decide that I need help. Number two, figure out why I am willing to commit myself to recovery. It's like a person going to gym. The first couple of times, it's time consuming, their muscles burn, they sore the next day. That's not fun. And yet, I've never met somebody who complained about the pain they experience physically after going to gym, because they know why they're going. They're motivated by the thought of feeling good, developing their bodies, being proud of themselves, feeling good about themselves. So initially, yes, it takes time. There's effort involved. It's a whole new way of thinking. But once you start to experience the fact I'm taking back my life, the fact that I can start to make my own choices, the fact that I'm slowly but surely regaining my family's trust again, the fact that I can start to feel good about myself, develop self-respect, and I do things like physical exercise, I eat healthy, I've got quality me time, all those new behaviors, surely the need for the drug must then become less and less and less. So recovery is not about stopping using drugs. That's the first baby step. Recovery is committing myself for the right reasons, and the reasons being what is in it for me, to develop a whole new quality of life where the need to use becomes less and less. How long does it take? How long do I have to stay in recovery? For the rest of my life. Well, actually not, for as long as I want to enjoy the benefits of recovery. We talk about addicts who relapse and we think, how on earth can they do that? How on earth can they be in recovery for a while and then they relapse and they go back to their old ways? Do you know that diseases like sugar diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, and heart disease, patients with those diseases, the relapse rate worldwide is between 50 and 60% amongst those patients. Meaning they stop using the medication, or they go back to the old lifestyle choices, or they stop exercising, or they stop eating healthy. That to me is more insane than the addict having cravings, having a fear of not being able to use. Those are patients who don't have cravings, who don't feel compelled to going back to the old way of life, who know that if they relapse in their treatment protocol, they risk dying. That doesn't make sense to me. So it must be part of human nature. I think the main reason is we get to a place where we start to feel okay. We feel strong enough, so we think, oh, I'm okay. I don't need to continue using my medication anymore. Or for the addict, I don't need to go to groups anymore or have the support or whatever. Just one more. I can just have one drink or one line or whatever it is. It's just human nature. So that is part of the battle in recovery, is to deal with that part of human nature that will always try and draw me back to my old behavior. Because, yes, there might be pleasures in the old behavior I want to go back to, but the denial of I am okay now. As addicts in recovery, we will never be okay. meaning we will never get to a place where we can now stop our recovery. When we lapse in our recovery, it's a matter of time before we will pick up again and act out as far as relapse is concerned. Relapse starts in my thinking about my recovery. So I slowly start to do less and less for my recovery, and it then leads to the actual acting out or the picking up. Just as a final nutshell, the problem in addiction is not the drug. The problem in addiction is the whole personality with everything that goes with it that needs to change. The goal in recovery is not to be sober. The goal in recovery is to develop a new quality of life where the need to use becomes less. It is a commitment that I will have to stick to for the rest of my life or for as long as I want to be in recovery. The only reason why I am in recovery is what's in it for me.